How did England colonize America? Welcome to our channel. Before starting, please like and subscribe for more stories. The English colonization of America was driven by a combination of economic ambitions, religious motivations, and geopolitical rivalries. By the late 16th century, England was eager to expand its influence, compete with other European powers, and explore the opportunities presented by the New World. Unlike the Spanish and Portuguese, who had already established vast empires in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, England's ventures into overseas colonization were relatively late. However, the conditions in England, coupled with the vision of key figures, set the stage for the eventual establishment of colonies in North America. The promise of wealth and resources was one of the primary drivers of English colonization. Europe in the 16th century was undergoing significant economic changes, including population growth, inflation, and the enclosure movement, which forced many English farmers off their land. The promise of finding gold, silver, and other valuable commodities in the Americas was irresistible to England's elite and commoners alike. Mercantilism. England operated under the economic theory of mercantilism, which emphasized the accumulation of wealth through trade and the establishment of colonies to provide raw materials and markets for finished goods. Colonies were seen as essential for creating a self-sufficient empire. The role of joint stock companies. The financing of early English expeditions was often organized through joint stock companies, which allowed investors to pool resources and share both the risks and rewards of colonization. The Virginia Company, which funded the establishment of Jamestown, is one notable example. Religion was another key factor in English colonization. Following the Protestant Reformation in the early 16th century, England became predominantly Protestant under Queen Elizabeth I, which put it at odds with Catholic Spain and France. Colonization offered an opportunity to spread Protestantism and challenge Catholic dominance in the Americas. Religious persecution. For groups like the Puritans and Separatists who faced persecution in England, the New World represented a chance to practice their faith freely. Colonies like Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay were established explicitly as religious havens. Conversion of indigenous peoples. The English, like other European powers, also saw colonization as a way to convert Native Americans to Christianity. Missionary efforts were a significant part of the colonization agenda, though they often came with the assumption of European cultural superiority. By the time England began to establish colonies, Spain and France were already well entrenched in the Americas. Spain's wealth, derived from its colonies in South and Central America, made it a dominant global power. England sought to challenge this dominance by establishing its own foothold in the New World. Privateering and raids. Before establishing colonies, England engaged in privateering, with figures like Sir Francis Drake raiding Spanish ships and settlements. These efforts disrupted Spain's control over the Americas and demonstrated England's growing naval power. The Roanoke Colony. England's first attempt at colonization, the Roanoke Colony, was founded in 1585 under the sponsorship of Sir Walter Raleigh. Located in present-day North Carolina, it was ultimately unsuccessful, with the settlers mysteriously disappearing. However, it provided valuable lessons for future colonization efforts. Key figures played pivotal roles in promoting and organizing England's colonization efforts. Explorers, financiers, and writers all contributed to the narrative that the New World was a land of opportunity and adventure. Richard Hakluyt, a geographer and writer, Hakluyt was one of the most vocal advocates for English colonization. His works, including Discourse on Western Planting, emphasized the economic and strategic benefits of establishing colonies in the Americas. Sir Walter Raleigh, as a courtier and explorer, Raleigh spearheaded England's early colonization attempts, including the ill-fated Roanoke Colony. His efforts laid the groundwork for later successes. While England's ambitions were grand, early colonization efforts were fraught with difficulties. Poor planning, lack of resources, and harsh conditions often led to failure. For example, the lost colony of Roanoke, established in 1587, the Roanoke Colony disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only the word Croton carved into a tree. The fate of the settlers remains unknown, but their struggles highlighted the challenges of establishing a foothold in the New World. Conflict with Native Americans. Early English settlers often underestimated the complexities of interacting with indigenous peoples. While some Native American groups were initially cooperative, misunderstandings, competition for resources, and cultural differences frequently led to conflict. The early failures of English colonization did not deter future efforts. By 1607, England had learned from its mistakes and established Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in North America. Backed by the Virginia Company, Jamestown marked the beginning of a new phase in English colonization, with greater planning, investment, and support from the Crown. Jamestown's success was driven by several factors. A focus on economic sustainability, particularly through the cultivation of tobacco. Better leadership, including figures like Captain John Smith. More organized relations with Native Americans, though conflicts persisted. The early motives for English colonization were rooted in a mix of economic ambition, religious fervor, and geopolitical competition. While initial attempts like Roanoke were failures, they provided valuable lessons that shaped future successes. The establishment of Jamestown in 1607 marked a turning point, paving the way for a broader English presence in the Americas. These early efforts set the stage for a colonization process that would profoundly impact the history of the New World and the development of the future United States. The founding of Jamestown in 1607 marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of English colonization. As the first permanent English settlement in North America, Jamestown became a cornerstone for future colonies and ultimately for the United States itself. However, its establishment was far from smooth. From its inception, Jamestown faced tremendous challenges, including disease, starvation, and conflicts with Native Americans. Yet, through resilience, innovation, and determination, the settlers overcame adversity and set the stage for England's expansion in the New World. Jamestown was established by the Virginia Company of London, a joint stock company chartered by King James I in 1606. The company's mission was twofold: to generate profit for its investors and to expand England's influence in the Americas. Unlike earlier short-lived attempts at colonization, the Virginia Company's approach was more strategic. Economic goals: the company hoped to find gold and other valuable resources in the New World. Inspired by the wealth Spain had extracted from its colonies, the Virginia Company envisioned Jamestown as a lucrative venture that would repay its investors handsomely. Strategic location: the site for Jamestown, located on a peninsula in the James River, modern-day Virginia, was chosen for its defensibility against potential Spanish attacks. However, the location's swampy conditions and lack of fresh water proved to be major drawbacks. On May 14, 1607, approximately 104 English settlers arrived and established the Jamestown settlement. These early colonists, a mix of gentlemen, soldiers, and laborers, faced severe hardships from the outset. One, harsh environmental conditions. The swampy land around Jamestown was teeming with mosquitoes carrying diseases like malaria. Additionally, the brackish water of the James River was unsuitable for drinking, leading to widespread dehydration and illness. 2, starvation and the starving time. Many of the settlers were ill-prepared for the harsh realities of survival in the New World. Lacking adequate farming skills, they struggled to produce enough food. During the winter of 1609 to 1610, known as the starving time, the colony's population dwindled from over 300 settlers to just 60 survivors due to famine, disease, and harsh weather. Archaeological evidence suggests that some settlers resorted to cannibalism during this period. 3, conflicts with Native Americans. Jamestown was established within the territory of the Powhatan Confederacy, a network of Native American tribes led by Chief Powhatan. While the Powhatan initially helped the settlers by providing food and guidance, relations quickly soured due to cultural misunderstandings and competition for resources. One of the most pivotal figures in Jamestown's early survival was Captain John Smith, a soldier and adventurer who became the colony's de facto leader in 1608. Smith implemented strict rules, including the famous policy of "he who does not work shall not eat," to ensure that every able-bodied settler contributed to the colony's survival. Relations with the Powhatan. Smith played a key role in negotiating with the Powhatan Confederacy, securing food and temporary peace. According to legend, he was captured by the Powhatan and saved from execution by Pocahontas, the chief's daughter. While historians debate the accuracy of this account, it underscores the complex relationship between the settlers and Native Americans. Exploration and mapping. Smith's leadership extended beyond survival. He explored and mapped the Chesapeake Bay region, providing valuable information that would aid future settlers. Jamestown's fortunes changed dramatically with the introduction of tobacco farming, which became the colony's economic backbone. In 1612, John Rolfe, an English settler, successfully cultivated a sweeter strain of tobacco using seeds from the Caribbean. This crop, highly popular in England, turned Jamestown into a profitable venture. Labor needs, the labor-intensive nature of tobacco farming, led to the rise of indentured servitude and, later, African slavery. In 1619, the first African laborers arrived in Jamestown aboard a Dutch ship, marking the beginning of a dark chapter in American history. Expansion and land ownership. Tobacco farming required large tracts of land, prompting the settlers to expand further into Powhatan territory. This expansion led to increased conflicts with Native Americans. In 1619, Jamestown became the site of the first representative government in North America with the establishment of the House of Burgesses. This legislative assembly allowed settlers to elect representatives who could make decisions on behalf of the colony, laying the groundwork for democratic governance in the future United States. The relationship between Jamestown settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy remained tense and often violent. While figures like Pocahontas helped foster temporary peace, she famously married John Rolfe in 1614, creating a brief period of harmony. The underlying conflicts over land and resources led to repeated clashes. Powhatan Uprising, 1622. After years of encroachment by settlers, the Powhatan launched a major attack in 1622, killing nearly a quarter of the colony's population. This event marked a turning point, leading to increased hostility and the eventual marginalization of the Powhatan people. Jamestown also faced internal struggles. Corruption within the Virginia Company and poor management often hampered the colony's progress. In 1624, King James I revoked the company's charter, making Virginia a royal colony under direct control of the crown. This shift brought greater stability, but also tighter oversight. Despite its early struggles, Jamestown laid the foundation for England's colonization of North America. The settlement became a symbol of perseverance and adaptability, demonstrating the potential for European societies to thrive in the New World. Cultural exchange. While often exploitative, the interactions between settlers and Native Americans introduced both groups to new crops, tools, and practices. Economic impact. The success of tobacco farming established a template for plantation economies in the southern colonies. Democratic ideals. The creation of the House of Burgesses marked a significant step towards self-governance and democratic representation. Jamestown's founding in 1607 was a pivotal moment in the history of English colonization. It marked the transition from speculative ventures to permanent settlements, setting the stage for the growth of the English colonies. Through resilience, innovation, and the ability to adapt to harsh conditions, the settlers of Jamestown overcame immense challenges to create a legacy that would shape the future of America. The story of the Pilgrims and the establishment of Plymouth Colony in 1620 is one of the most well-known chapters in early American history. It is a tale of religious devotion, perseverance, and the search for freedom, intertwined with the challenges of survival in an unfamiliar land. The Pilgrims, a group of English separatists fleeing religious persecution, sought to build a community where they could worship freely. Their journey aboard the Mayflower, the hardships they endured, and their interactions with the Native Americans laid the foundation for the New England colonies and shaped the cultural narrative of America. The Pilgrims were part of a radical faction of English Protestants known as Separatists, who sought to break away completely from the Church of England. Unlike the Puritans, who wanted to reform the Church from within, the Separatists believed the Church of England was beyond saving and chose to form independent congregations. Religious persecution. Under the reign of King James I, the Pilgrims faced persecution for their beliefs. They rejected the authority of the Church of England and refused to participate in its rituals, leading to fines, imprisonment, and harassment. Exile in the Netherlands. To escape persecution, the Pilgrims fled to the Netherlands in 1608, settling in the city of Leiden. While they enjoyed religious freedom there, they struggled to adapt to Dutch society and feared losing their English identity. Economic hardships and concerns about their children assimilating into Dutch culture ultimately led them to seek a new home in the New World. In 1620, The Pilgrims secured financial backing from English investors to establish a colony in North America. They set sail aboard the Mayflower, a 100-foot-long ship carrying 102 passengers, including the Pilgrims and other settlers seeking economic opportunities, collectively known as the Strangers. The voyage was treacherous, lasting over 2 months. Passengers endured cramped conditions, rough seas, and illnesses. By the time they reached the New World, morale was low, and several passengers had died. Arrival at Cape Cod, originally bound for the Hudson River, the Mayflower was blown off course and landed at Cape Cod in present-day Massachusetts. After exploring the area, the settlers chose Plymouth as their settlement site, named after the port they had departed from in England. Before disembarking, the Pilgrims recognized the need for a framework of governance, as they were outside the jurisdiction of the Virginia Company. They drafted the Mayflower Compact, a landmark document in the history of democracy. Key features: the compact established a civil government based on the consent of the governed. All signers pledged to work together for the colony's survival and to abide by laws created for the common good. Significance: the Mayflower Compact is considered one of the first steps towards self-governance in the American colonies, setting a precedent for later democratic principles. The settlers faced immediate challenges upon arriving in Plymouth. The harsh winter, combined with a lack of adequate shelter and limited food supplies, took a devastating toll. Disease and starvation: nearly half of the settlers died during the first winter due to exposure, malnutrition, and illness. Despite these hardships, the survivors remained determined to build their community. Burial Hill: to avoid showing weakness to potential Native American adversaries, the Pilgrims buried their dead in unmarked graves. The survival of Plymouth Colony would not have been possible without the assistance of the Wampanoag people who inhabited the region. Initially wary of the settlers, the Wampanoag formed a mutually beneficial alliance with the Pilgrims. Squanto's guidance: a member of the Patuxet tribe, Squanto had previously been kidnapped by English explorers and spent years in Europe before returning to his homeland. Fluent in English, Squanto taught the Pilgrims essential survival skills, including how to grow corn, fish, and use local plants for medicine. Alliance with Massasoit: the Pilgrims established a peace treaty with Massasoit, the leader of the Wampanoag Confederacy. This alliance provided the Pilgrims with protection from other tribes and enabled trade between the two groups. In the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims celebrated their first successful harvest with a 3-day feast, now known as the First Thanksgiving. The Wampanoag, including Massasoit, joined the celebration, bringing food and participating in the festivities. What was on the menu? The feast likely included venison, wild fowl such as turkey, corn, squash, and other local foods, rather than the modern staples of pumpkin pie and cranberry sauce. Symbolism: although the First Thanksgiving has become a symbol of cooperation and gratitude, it also represents a complex history of interactions between Native Americans and European settlers. Plymouth Colony gradually grew as more settlers arrived from England. The colony's economy was based on subsistence farming, fishing, and trade. It maintained a relatively harmonious relationship with Native Americans for its first few decades. Governance: under the leadership of figures like William Bradford, Plymouth Colony developed a system of governance based on religious principles and communal responsibility. Religious freedom and tensions: while the Pilgrims sought religious freedom for themselves, they were less tolerant of dissent within their community. Strict adherence to their beliefs led to conflicts with individuals who challenged their authority. Although Plymouth Colony was eventually absorbed into the larger Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1691, its legacy remains significant in American history. Cultural impact: the Pilgrims' story became a cornerstone of American identity, symbolizing perseverance, freedom, and gratitude. Historical significance: Plymouth set an example of self-governance and community cooperation, influencing the development of other New England colonies. Thanksgiving tradition: the Pilgrims' harvest feast with the Wampanoag inspire the modern Thanksgiving holiday, though its history is more complex than the traditional narrative suggests. The Pilgrims' journey to Plymouth and their efforts to establish a stable and prosperous colony represent a remarkable chapter in the history of English colonization. Their dedication to religious freedom, their resilience in the face of adversity, and their ability to build relationships with Native Americans created a model for future settlers. While their story is often idealized, The realities of their struggles and the complexities of their interactions with indigenous peoples provide valuable lessons about cooperation, survival, and the human spirit. The Puritans were a critical force in the English colonization of America, leaving a profound impact on the cultural, religious, and political landscape of the New World. Unlike the Pilgrims, who were separatists seeking to break away completely from the Church of England, the Puritans sought to reform and purify the Church from within. Their mission in the New World was not just about survival, but also about creating a society that adhered strictly to their religious principles, a city upon a hill that would serve as a beacon of righteousness. The founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630 became the cornerstone of Puritan efforts in America, shaping the region we now know as New England. The Puritans were a group of devout Protestants who emerged during the English Reformation in the 16th and 17th centuries. They believed that the Church of England retained too many practices and rituals associated with Roman Catholicism and sought to simplify and purify religious worship. Core beliefs: Puritans emphasized the authority of the Bible, personal piety, and moral discipline. They rejected elaborate ceremonies, hierarchical church structures, and the idea that salvation could be achieved through good works rather than divine grace. Conflict in England: under the reigns of Elizabeth I, James I, and Charles I, the Puritans faced increasing persecution for their refusal to conform to the Church of England. Many Puritans saw migration to the New World as a chance to practice their faith freely and build a godly society. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded in 1630 by a group of Puritans led by John Winthrop, a lawyer and devout believer in the Puritan mission. Unlike the Pilgrims of Plymouth, the Puritans were backed by the Massachusetts Bay Company, which had received a royal charter to establish a colony in New England. The Great Migration: between 1620 and 1640, tens of thousands of Puritans migrated to New England as part of the Great Migration. Most settled in Massachusetts Bay, but others spread to neighboring colonies like Connecticut and Rhode Island. The Arbella Sermon: before departing for the New World, John Winthrop delivered his famous sermon, a model of Christian charity, aboard the Arbella. In it, he articulated the idea of a city upon a hill, emphasizing the Puritans' mission to create a model society based on biblical principles. The Puritans believed that their society was bound by a covenant with God, requiring strict adherence to moral and religious laws. This belief heavily influenced the governance and structure of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Theocracy and self-governance: the colony was governed as a theocracy, where church leaders wielded significant influence over civil affairs. Only male church members, known as freemen, were allowed to vote and participate in government. This structure blurred the lines between religious and political authority. Town meetings: local governance was conducted through town meetings, where community members gathered to discuss and decide on issues. This form of participatory democracy became a hallmark of New England and influenced later American political traditions. The Puritans placed a strong emphasis on education and community, believing that an educated populace was essential for understanding the Bible and maintaining a moral society. Founding of schools: the Puritans established some of the first schools in America, including the Boston Latin School in 1635 and Harvard College in 1636. Harvard was created to train ministers and ensure a steady supply of religious leaders. Community life: Puritan towns were tightly knit communities, with central meeting houses serving as places of worship and civic discussion. The Puritans prioritized collective welfare and discouraged behaviors that threatened social harmony. While the Puritans sought religious freedom for themselves, they were often intolerant of dissenting views. This rigidity led to conflicts within the colony and the establishment of new settlements. Roger Williams, a minister who advocated for the separation of church and state and fair treatment of Native Americans, Williams was banished from Massachusetts in 1636. He went on to found Rhode Island, which became a haven for religious tolerance. And Hutchinson challenged Puritan orthodoxy by holding religious meetings in her home and asserting that individuals could interpret the Bible without the guidance of ministers. She was also banished and later settled in Rhode Island. The expansion of the Massachusetts Bay Colony led to both cooperation and conflict with Native American tribes. Trade and early cooperation: initially, the Puritans traded with Native Americans, benefiting from their knowledge of the land and resources. The Pequot War, 1636 to 1638, as settlers encroached on native lands, tensions escalated into the Pequot War, a brutal conflict that resulted in the near destruction of the Pequot tribe. King Philip's War, 1675 to 1678, decades later, the Puritans faced a larger uprising led by Metacom, King Philip, a Wampanoag leader. The war devastated Native American communities in New England and marked a turning point in settler-native relations. While the Puritans were deeply religious, they also built a thriving economy based on agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship. Subsistence farming. Most Puritans were small-scale farmers, growing crops like corn, beans, and squash. Maritime trade. The colony's location along the coast allowed for the development of fishing, shipbuilding, and trade with England and the Caribbean. Work ethic. The Puritan work ethic, rooted in the belief that hard work and discipline were signs of piety, became a defining characteristic of New England culture. The influence of the Puritans extended far beyond the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Their values and institutions shaped the social, cultural, and political identity of New England and, by extension, the United States. Education and democracy. The Puritans' emphasis on education and self-governance laid the groundwork for American democratic ideals. Moral and religious foundations. Puritan ideas about morality, individual responsibility, and community welfare continue to resonate in American culture. Expansion and settlement. The success of the Massachusetts Bay Colony inspired the establishment of other New England colonies, contributing to the broader English presence in America. The Puritans' vision of a city upon a hill reflected their aspirations to create a model society based on religious principles and moral discipline. While their intolerance of dissent and conflicts with Native Americans reveal the complexities of their legacy, the Massachusetts Bay Colony's achievements in governance, education, and community building left an indelible mark on American history. The Puritan story is one of ambition, resilience, and the enduring tension between idealism and pragmatism in the pursuit of a better world. The Middle Colonies, comprising New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, occupied a unique position in early English America. They were characterized by their cultural, religious, and economic diversity, setting them apart from the more homogeneous New England and Southern colonies. The Middle Colonies became a vibrant hub of commerce, agriculture, and immigration, earning a reputation as the breadbasket of colonial America due to their fertile farmland and abundant grain production. Their history reflects a blend of influences from the English, Dutch, Swedish, and other European settlers, making them a melting pot of colonial life. Before becoming English territories, much of the Middle Colonies region was originally claimed and settled by the Dutch and Swedish. New Netherland and New Amsterdam. The Dutch established the colony of New Netherland in the early 1600s, with its capital New Amsterdam, located on the southern tip of Manhattan Island. The Dutch West India Company sought to profit from fur trading with Native Americans and create a strategic trading hub in North America. New Amsterdam grew into a bustling port and became known for its tolerance of different cultures and religions. Swedish influence. In 1638, the Swedes founded the colony of New Sweden along the Delaware River. They introduced the log cabin to North America, a building style that became iconic in the colonies. However, New Sweden was short-lived, as the Dutch absorbed it into New Netherland in 1655. The English takeover. In 1664, the English seized New Netherland from the Dutch without significant resistance. King Charles II granted the land to his brother, the Duke of York, renaming the territory New York. Parts of the land were later divided to form New Jersey, leading to the establishment of two distinct colonies. One of the most influential Middle Colonies was Pennsylvania, founded in 1681 by William Penn, a Quaker. Penn envisioned Pennsylvania as a haven for religious freedom and equality, earning it the nickname the Holy Experiment. Quaker beliefs. The Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, were a Christian group known for their pacifism, egalitarianism, and opposition to slavery. They emphasized the inner light, or the direct connection between each individual and God, rejecting formal clergy and hierarchical church structures. Religious tolerance. Pennsylvania attracted settlers from various religious backgrounds, including Quakers, Mennonites, Lutherans, and Catholics. This diversity made it one of the most religiously tolerant colonies in America. Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia, founded by Penn, became the largest and most prosperous city in colonial America. Its well-planned grid layout, combined with its bustling port and thriving intellectual scene, made it a center of commerce and culture. The Middle Colonies were known for their multicultural population, which included English, Dutch, German, Swedish, Irish, and Scottish settlers. This diversity was largely due to policies of religious tolerance and the availability of fertile land, which attracted immigrants from across Europe. Germans and Scots-Irish. Large numbers of Germans settled in Pennsylvania, contributing to its agricultural success. They introduced farming techniques, foods, and crafts that enriched colonial life. The Scots-Irish, who were primarily Presbyterian, settled in the frontier regions, where they played a significant role in expanding the colonial borders. Slavery and free African Americans. While the Middle Colonies had fewer enslaved Africans compared to the South, slavery still existed, particularly in urban areas like New York City. The region also had a growing population of free African Americans who contributed to its economic and cultural life. The Middle Colonies' economy was diverse and prosperous, striking a balance between the agriculture-focused South and the trade-centered New England colonies. They became known as the breadbasket colonies due to their production of wheat, barley, oats, and rye. Farming, the fertile soil and temperate climate of the Middle Colonies made them ideal for agriculture. Large farms produced surplus grains, which were exported to other colonies in Europe. Trade and industry. Ports like Philadelphia and New York City became major commercial hubs, facilitating the export of agricultural goods and the import of manufactured products. Shipbuilding, iron production, and small-scale manufacturing also contributed to the region's economy. Markets and diversity. The Middle Colonies were home to a mix of small farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and large landowners. This economic diversity supported a stable and thriving society. The Middle Colonies initially experienced more peaceful relations with Native Americans compared to other regions, largely due to the influence of leaders like William Penn. Penn's Treaty of Friendship. William Penn negotiated fair treaties with the Lenape Delaware tribe, establishing peaceful coexistence and trade. Penn's policies reflected his Quaker principles of equality and respect for all people. Land conflicts. As the population grew and settlers demanded more land, tensions with Native Americans increased. Conflicts became more frequent in the 18th century, particularly in frontier areas where settlers encroached on native lands. The Middle Colonies' religious and cultural tolerance set them apart from New England, where Puritanism dominated, and the South, where the Anglican Church was prominent. This openness attracted settlers from a wide range of backgrounds, fostering a society that was more accepting of diversity. Cultural exchange. The mingling of cultures in the Middle Colonies created a unique colonial identity. Festivals, languages, foods, and traditions from different immigrant groups enriched the region's social fabric. Education and literacy. While education was not as formalized as in New England, the Middle Colonies saw the establishment of schools and institutions, often tied to specific religious groups. For example, German immigrants established parochial schools to preserve their language and culture. The Middle Colonies' central location along the Atlantic coast made them a crossroads of commerce and migration. Their navigable rivers, such as the Hudson, Delaware, and Susquehanna, provided access to inland territories, facilitating trade and settlement expansion. The Middle Colonies represented a microcosm of the broader American experience, blending cultures, religions, and economic practices into a dynamic and diverse society. Their openness to immigrants and tolerance for religious diversity made them a model of pluralism, while their economic success laid the foundation for future growth. The Middle Colonies not only bridged the geographic gap between New England and the South, but also embodied the cultural and social diversity that would come to define the United States. The Southern Colonies, Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, played a crucial role in the English colonization of America. These colonies were characterized by their warm climate, fertile soil, and the development of large-scale agriculture, which shaped their economy, society, and culture. The Southern colonies became the backbone of the colonial economy, relying heavily on plantation agriculture and the labor of enslaved Africans and indentured servants. Their history reflects a complex interplay of economic ambition, social stratification, and interactions with Native Americans. The Southern colonies were among the first English settlements in America, with Jamestown, Virginia, established in 1607 as the first permanent colony. Each colony was founded with distinct goals and challenges, but shared common features that set them apart from the northern and middle colonies. 1. Virginia. Jamestown marked the beginning of English colonization in the South. The introduction of tobacco farming by John Rolfe turned Virginia into a profitable colony and laid the foundation for the plantation economy. 2. Maryland. Founded in 1632 as a proprietary colony by Cecilius Calvert, Lord Baltimore, Maryland was intended as a haven for Catholics fleeing persecution in England. The colony's economy soon mirrored Virginia's, centered on tobacco farming. 3. The Carolinas. Originally a single colony granted to a group of 8 proprietors in 1663, the Carolinas were later divided into North Carolina and South Carolina in 1712. The southern part of the colony, with its port city of Charleston, became a hub for rice and indigo plantations. For Georgia, established in 1733 by James Oglethorpe, Georgia was initially designed as a buffer colony to protect the Carolinas from Spanish Florida. It also served as a haven for debtors and the poor. However, its economy eventually adopted the plantation model. The southern colonies were heavily reliant on plantation agriculture, which became the cornerstone of their economy. The warm climate, long growing season, and fertile soil made the South ideal for cultivating cash crops. Tobacco. Introduced in Virginia and Maryland, tobacco was the most important crop of the southern colonies, driving their economy and attracting settlers. Large plantations required significant labor, initially provided by indentured servants and later by enslaved Africans. Rice and indigo. In South Carolina and Georgia, the swampy lowlands were perfect for growing rice, a labor-intensive crop that required extensive irrigation systems. Indigo, used to produce blue dye, became another valuable export. Cotton, later development. While cotton became the dominant crop of the South in the 19th century, its cultivation began to emerge in the late colonial period. The success of the plantation economy depended on a large and cheap labor force. This need was initially met by indentured servants, but by the late 1600s, the labor system shifted to reliance on African slavery. Indentured servitude. Many early settlers came to the southern colonies as indentured servants, agreeing to work for a set number of years in exchange for passage to America. However, as the mortality rate improved and servants completed their terms, there was a growing demand for a more permanent labor force. The rise of slavery. The first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619, marking the beginning of a brutal system of forced labor. By the late 17th century, slavery had become institutionalized, with laws codifying the status of enslaved people as property. The Atlantic slave trade brought thousands of Africans to the colonies, fundamentally shaping Southern society. The Southern colonies developed a highly stratified society, shaped by the plantation system and the wealth it generated. 1. Planter elite. At the top of the social hierarchy were the wealthy planters, who owned large plantations and hundreds of enslaved workers. They dominated the economy, politics, and social life of the South. 2. Small farmers. Below the planter elite were small farmers who owned modest plots of land and worked it themselves. While they aspired to join the ranks of the elite, they often struggled to compete with the wealthier plantation owners. 3. Indentured servants and slaves. At the bottom of society were indentured servants and enslaved Africans. Enslaved people were subjected to harsh conditions, with no rights or freedoms, while indentured servants had limited opportunities to improve their circumstances. The expansion of the southern colonies led to frequent conflicts with Native American tribes, as settlers encroached on their lands to establish plantations and settlements. Trade and alliances. In the early years, settlers traded with Native Americans, exchanging goods like firearms and metal tools for furs and food. Some tribes formed alliances with the colonists, hoping to gain advantages over rival tribes. Conflicts and wars. As settlers demanded more land, tensions escalated into violent conflicts, such as the Powhatan Wars in Virginia and the Yamasee War in South Carolina. These conflicts often resulted in the displacement or decimation of native populations. Impact of European diseases. The introduction of European diseases devastated Native American communities, further weakening their ability to resist colonization. While the southern colonies were less religiously homogeneous than New England, Anglicanism became the dominant faith, particularly in Virginia and the Carolinas. Religious diversity. Maryland was initially founded as a Catholic haven, but the passage of the Toleration Act of 1649 ensured freedom of worship for all Christians. Over time, other Protestant denominations, including Baptists and Methodists, gained followers in the South. Cultural practices. Southern society revolved around plantation life, with wealthy planters adopting European cultural traditions such as elaborate architecture, refined manners, and patronage of the arts. The Southern colony's economy was closely tied to England through the system of mercantilism, which emphasized the export of raw materials and the import of manufactured goods. The Navigation Acts. These laws require that colonial goods be shipped to England before being sold elsewhere, ensuring that England benefited from colonial trade. While this system enriched some Southern planters, it also created tensions that contributed to later colonial resistance. Global trade. The Southern colonies were integral to the triangular trade, which connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Enslaved Africans were brought to the colonies to work on plantations, while crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo were exported to Europe. The Southern colonies' focus on agriculture, reliance on enslaved labor, and hierarchical society left a lasting legacy that shaped the development of the United States. Economic foundations. The wealth generated by the plantation economy helped fund colonial expansion and contributed to the global prominence of the British Empire. The colonization of America by the English was deeply influenced by the presence of Native American tribes. Native Americans were not passive observers in this process, but active participants who shaped, resisted, and adapted to the changes brought by European settlement. From initial cooperation and trade to violent conflicts and eventual displacement, their relationship with the English settlers was complex and dynamic. The story of Native Americans during the period of colonization is one of resilience, adaptation, and profound cultural loss as they faced the expanding English presence in their ancestral lands. When English settlers first arrived in the New World, they relied heavily on Native Americans for survival. The indigenous peoples possessed an intimate knowledge of the land, its resources, and the techniques required for survival. One mutual benefits of trade. The English traded goods like metal tools, firearms, and beads with Native Americans in exchange for food, furs, and guidance. This exchange introduced European goods into indigenous economies, fundamentally altering native lifestyles. For the English, these early trade relationships were essential for survival, particularly during the first years in settlements like Jamestown and Plymouth, when food was scarce. 2. Native agricultural knowledge. Native Americans taught settlers how to cultivate local crops like corn, beans, and squash, often referred to as the Three Sisters. These crops became staples for the colonists and helped prevent starvation. Figures like Squanto, a member of the Patuxet tribe, played a pivotal role in teaching the Pilgrims agricultural techniques that ensured the survival of Plymouth Colony. 3. Early alliances. In some regions, Native American tribes formed alliances with the English, often to gain an advantage over rival tribes. For example, the Wampanoag allied with the Pilgrims at Plymouth, and the Powhatan Confederacy initially assisted the settlers at Jamestown. Despite initial cooperation, significant cultural differences and misunderstandings between Native Americans and English settlers often led to tensions. 1. Land ownership. For many Native American tribes, land was a communal resource to be shared and managed collectively. In contrast, the English viewed land as private property that could be owned, bought, and sold. This fundamental difference caused friction as settlers expanded their territories, often encroaching on native lands without consent. 2. Religious differences. The English viewed Native American spiritual practices as heathen and sought to convert them to Christianity. Missionary efforts were met with varying degrees of resistance and acceptance, further straining relationships. Native American spiritual beliefs were deeply tied to the land, and the settlers' deforestation and agricultural practices disrupted sacred spaces and traditions. 3. European diseases. The arrival of the English brought devastating diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which Native Americans had no immunity. These epidemics wiped out entire communities, significantly weakening indigenous populations and their ability to resist colonization. It is estimated that up to 90% of the Native American population in some areas perished due to disease during the early years of English settlement. As English colonies grew and expanded, tensions with Native Americans escalated into violent conflicts. These wars and uprisings were often sparked by disputes over land, resources, and cultural differences. 1. The Powhatan Wars, 1610 to 1646. In Virginia, the Powhatan Confederacy, led by Chief Powhatan, initially helped the settlers at Jamestown. However, as the colony expanded and demanded more land, relations deteriorated. A series of wars broke out, including a major attack in 1622 that killed over 300 settlers. These conflicts eventually ended with the subjugation and displacement of the Powhatan people. 2. Pequot War, 1636 to 1638. In New England, tensions between the Pequot tribe and English settlers escalated into a brutal conflict known as the Pequot War. The war culminated in the Mystic Massacre, where English forces and their native allies attacked a Pequot village, killing hundreds, including women and children. The Pequot tribe was effectively destroyed, with survivors enslaved or dispersed. 3. King Philip's War, 1675 to 1678. One of the most devastating conflicts in colonial America, King Philip's War was led by Metacom King Philip, a Wampanoag leader who sought to resist English expansion in New England. The war resulted in the deaths of thousands of Native Americans and colonists and decimated Native resistance in the region. Survivors were often enslaved or forced to flee, and their lands were taken by settlers. 4. Bacon's Rebellion, 1676. In Virginia, tensions between settlers and Native Americans over land led to Bacon's Rebellion, a violent uprising led by Nathaniel Bacon. The rebellion targeted both native tribes and the colonial government, reflecting the settlers' frustration with restrictions on westward expansion. Despite the immense challenges posed by disease, displacement, and warfare, Native Americans adapted in various ways to the changing circumstances. 1. Alliances with colonists. Some tribes aligned themselves with the English to gain military or economic advantages over rival tribes. For example, the Mohegan and Narragansett tribes allied with the English during the Pequot War. 2. Incorporation of European goods. Native Americans adopted European technologies, such as firearms, metal tools, and horses, which transformed their societies and ways of life. 3. Resistance and preservation of culture. Many Native groups resisted assimilation and maintained their cultural practices despite pressure from missionaries and settlers. Oral traditions, ceremonies, and community structures helped preserve their identities. By the late 17th century, the expansion of English colonies had pushed many Native Americans off their ancestral lands. Reservations and relocation. Native tribes were forced onto small reservations or driven westward, leading to the loss of traditional hunting grounds and resources. Cultural suppression. Efforts to Christianize and civilize Native Americans often involved the suppression of their languages, religions, and traditions. The contributions of Native Americans to the survival and success of the English colonies cannot be overstated. From teaching settlers how to farm to engaging in trade and alliances, their influence was profound. However, the colonization process also led to the widespread displacement, marginalization, and destruction of indigenous cultures. 1. Cultural exchange. Native American foods, knowledge, and practices became integral to colonial life, shaping the agricultural and cultural development of the colonies. 2. A complex history. The relationship between Native Americans and English settlers was one of cooperation, conflict, and coexistence. This history reflects the broader themes of colonization, resilience, and cultural transformation. Religion played a central role in the establishment and development of the English colonies in America. From the Puritans in New England to Catholics in Maryland and Quakers in Pennsylvania, religious beliefs influenced governance, societal structures, and the interactions between settlers and Native Americans. The quest for religious freedom was often cited as a key motivation for migration, yet the colonies themselves varied widely in their tolerance for religious diversity. This complex interplay between faith, governance, and culture left a lasting legacy that shaped the identity of the colonies and later the United States. 1. Escape from persecution. In the 16th and 17th centuries, religious conflict was widespread in Europe. In England, dissenters from the Church of England, such as Puritans, Separatists, and Quakers, faced persecution for their beliefs. Many English migrants sought to escape these oppressive conditions and establish communities where they could practice their faith freely. 2. Spreading Christianity. Beyond seeking freedom for themselves, many English settlers viewed colonization as an opportunity to spread Christianity to Native Americans. Missionary work, often tied to the settlers' broader colonial ambitions, became an important aspect of religious life in the New World. 3. The Protestant-Catholic divide. The colonization of America occurred against the backdrop of intense rivalry between Protestant England and Catholic powers like Spain and France. Colonization was often framed as part of this broader religious struggle, with Protestant England seeking to counterbalance Catholic influence in the Americas. Religion was deeply intertwined with governance in many of the English colonies, particularly in New England. 1. New England, Puritan theocracy. The Puritans established the Massachusetts Bay Colony with the goal of creating a city upon a hill, a model Christian society based on biblical principles. Church and state were closely linked, with only male church members allowed to vote or hold public office. Religious conformity was strictly enforced, and dissenters faced banishment or persecution. Examples of dissent include Roger Williams, who founded Rhode Island as a haven for religious freedom, and in Hutchinson, who was exiled for challenging Puritan orthodoxy. 2. Maryland, a Catholic haven. Maryland was founded in 1632 by Lord Baltimore as a refuge for Catholics who faced discrimination in Protestant England. The Maryland Toleration Act of 1649 was one of the first laws to guarantee religious freedom, but it only extended to Christians, excluding non-Christian faiths. 3. Pennsylvania, Quaker tolerance. William Penn, a Quaker, established Pennsylvania as a holy experiment where people of all religions could live in harmony. Quakers emphasized equality, nonviolence, and religious tolerance, attracting a diverse population of Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and other groups. 4. The Southern colonies. In Virginia and the Carolinas, the Anglican Church was the dominant religious institution, supported by colonial governments. While less rigidly theocratic than New England, these colonies required taxes to support the Anglican Church and restricted the rights of non-Anglicans. Despite the promise of religious freedom, many colonies struggled with religious conflict and intolerance. 1. Persecution of dissenters. In Massachusetts, Quakers and Baptists were often fined, imprisoned, or banished for their beliefs. The Puritans' strict adherence to their faith left little room for alternative viewpoints. 2. Salem witch trials. One of the darkest episodes in colonial religious history occurred in Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692. Fear of witchcraft and religious hysteria led to the execution of 20 people and the imprisonment of many more. 3. Religious pluralism in the Middle Colonies. The Middle Colonies, particularly Pennsylvania, were unique for their acceptance of religious diversity. However, this pluralism sometimes caused tension as different groups competed for influence and resources. Many colonists saw it as their religious duty to convert Native Americans to Christianity. 1. Puritan missions. In New England, missionaries like John Eliot worked to convert Native Americans, translating the Bible into indigenous languages and establishing praying towns where converts were expected to adopt English customs and lifestyles. 2. Mixed results. While some Native Americans embraced Christianity, many resisted conversion efforts, viewing them as a threat to their traditional beliefs and way of life. 1. Influence on education. Religious values strongly influenced the development of education in the colonies. The Puritans, for example, established schools to ensure that children could read the Bible. Harvard College, founded in 1636, was originally intended to train ministers. 2. Moral and social norms. Religion shaped the moral and social fabric of colonial life, dictating standards of behavior and community values. Violations of religious norms, such as drunkenness or blasphemy, were often punished harshly. Religion in the English colonies laid the groundwork for several enduring aspects of American culture and society. 1. Religious freedom. The colony's struggles with religious tolerance and persecution contributed to the later development of the principle of religious freedom, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. 2. Diverse religious landscape. The pluralism of colonies like Pennsylvania and the Middle Colonies set a precedent for the diversity of faiths in the United States today. 3. Moral foundations. The religious values of the colonies, particularly the Puritan emphasis on hard work and discipline, became part of the broader American ethos. Religion was a driving force behind the colonization of America, influencing everything from governance and law to education and cultural norms. While it was often a source of conflict and exclusion, religion also provided a sense of purpose and community for settlers. The varied religious traditions of the colonies created a complex legacy that shaped the development of the United States, fostering ideals of freedom, diversity, and moral responsibility that continue to resonate today. The English colonies in America developed robust and diverse economies that became the backbone of their success and growth. These economies were shaped by geography, natural resources, labor systems, and trade networks, resulting in distinct economic patterns in New England, the Middle Colonies, and the Southern Colonies. From subsistence farming to large-scale plantation agriculture, and from small-town craftsmanship to bustling ports, the economic foundations of the colonies laid the groundwork for the thriving economy of the future United States. Farming was the primary economic activity across all the colonies, but its nature varied significantly based on regional conditions. One New England, subsistence farming and limited agriculture. New England's rocky soil and short growing season made large-scale farming difficult. Instead, settlers focused on subsistence farming, growing crops like corn, beans, and squash for personal use. Livestock raising and small family farms were common, and the region's economy relied more on fishing, timber, and trade than agriculture. 2. The Middle Colonies, the breadbasket of America. With fertile soil and a moderate climate, the Middle Colonies were ideal for growing grains such as wheat, barley, and rye. These grains were exported in large quantities, earning the region its nickname as the breadbasket. The Middle Colonies also supported a mix of small farms and larger estates, with many farmers practicing diverse agriculture, including fruits, vegetables, and livestock. 3. The Southern Colonies, plantation agriculture. The Southern Colonies had rich soil and a long growing season, making them ideal for cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. These crops were grown on large plantations that relied heavily on enslaved labor. Tobacco was the primary export crop in Virginia and Maryland, while rice and indigo dominated in South Carolina and Georgia. The profitability of these crops tied the Southern economy closely to international markets. The success of colonial agriculture depended on the availability of labor, which evolved over time to meet the growing demands of the colonies. 1. Indentured servitude. In the early years of colonization, indentured servants were a primary source of labor, particularly in the Southern colonies. These workers agreed to work for a set number of years in exchange for passage to America, food, and shelter. While indentured servitude helped populate the colonies, it was not sufficient to meet the labor needs of large plantations. 2. The shift to African slavery. By the late 1600s, the labor system began shifting toward African slavery. Enslaved people were brought to the colonies through the Atlantic slave trade, which became a cornerstone of the colonial economy. Slavery was particularly prevalent in the South, where plantations required a large, permanent labor force. In contrast, the Middle and New England colonies used enslaved labor on a smaller scale, often in households or small-scale agriculture. 3. Economic impact of slavery. The reliance on slavery generated immense wealth for the colonies and the British Empire. However, it also created deep social and economic divides, with profound consequences that would resonate for centuries. Trade was essential to the colonial economy, connecting the colonies to each other, to England, and to global markets. 1. Triangular trade. The colonies were part of the triangular trade, a transatlantic system that connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Colonies exported raw materials like tobacco, rice, and lumber to England, imported manufactured goods, and participated in the slave trade by acquiring enslaved Africans from Africa. 2. Export-oriented economies. Each region specialized in particular exports. New England, fish, timber, and ships. Middle colonies, grains and livestock. Southern colonies, tobacco, rice, and indigo. 3. Urban trade centers. Ports like Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, and Charleston became bustling hubs of commerce, facilitating both domestic and international trade. Merchants, shipbuilders, and artisans in these cities played a crucial role in the colonial economy. The colonial economy was shaped by England's mercantilist policies, which sought to maximize the empire's wealth by controlling colonial trade and production. 1. The Navigation Acts. England passed a series of laws called the Navigation Acts, which required that colonial goods be transported on English ships and that certain products, like tobacco and sugar, be exported only to England. These laws aimed to ensure that the colonies remained economically dependent on England and contributed to its wealth. 2. Colonial frustrations. While the Navigation Acts benefited some merchants, they also stifled economic independence and created resentment among colonists. These frustrations contributed to the growing tensions between the colonies and England that eventually led to the American Revolution. Although agriculture dominated, other industries played important roles in the colonial economy. 1. New England shipbuilding and fishing. New England's forests provided timber for shipbuilding, while its coastal waters supported a thriving fishing industry. Cod became a major export, shipped to Europe and the Caribbean. 2. Ironworks and crafts. The Middle Colonies developed small-scale industries, such as ironworks, textiles, and skilled craftsmanship. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and weavers were integral to colonial life. 3. Self-sufficiency and small-scale production. Many colonists produced goods at home, including clothing, candles, and soap. This self-sufficiency was essential for survival in rural areas. Despite their economic success, the colonies faced challenges and inequalities. 1. Regional disparities. The southern colonies relied on wealth generated by plantations, creating a stark divide between wealthy landowners and poorer settlers. In contrast, New England's economy was more evenly distributed, with small farms and family businesses forming the backbone of society. 2. Impact of wars. Conflicts like the French and Indian War disrupted trade and strained colonial economies. However, these wars also created opportunities for economic growth, such as increased demand for supplies. The economic foundations of the English colonies were critical to their survival, growth, and success. While agriculture, trade, and labor systems provided the means for prosperity, they also created tensions that foreshadowed future conflicts, including the American Revolution and the Civil War. The legacy of the colonial economy is one of both remarkable achievement and deep complexity, reflecting the challenges and opportunities of building a new society in the New World. The establishment of English dominance in North America was a gradual and multifaceted process, involving strategic colonization, military conflict, and political consolidation. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, England had outmaneuvered its European rivals, particularly France and Spain, to secure control over vast territories in the New World. This dominance was not only a result of England's growing colonial ambitions, but also its ability to adapt to changing geopolitical and economic circumstances. 1. Conflict with Spain. Spain had been the dominant European power in the Americas since the late 15th century, controlling vast territories in Central and South America, the Caribbean, and parts of North America. English privateers, such as Sir Francis Drake, disrupted Spanish trade and settlements in the New World during the late 16th century. These efforts, combined with the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, marked the beginning of England's challenge to Spanish supremacy. 2. Rivalry with France. France established colonies in Canada and along the Mississippi River, posing a significant challenge to English expansion. French settlements, focused on the fur trade, formed strong alliances with Native American tribes. The competition between England and France culminated in the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, the North American theater of the global 7 Years' War. The French and Indian War was a decisive conflict that solidified England's dominance in North America. 1. Territorial gains. The war ended with the Treaty of Paris, 1763, which ceded French territories east of the Mississippi River to England. Spain, which had allied with France, ceded Florida to England in exchange for territories west of the Mississippi. England emerged as the primary colonial power in North America, controlling Canada, the eastern seaboard, and parts of the Caribbean. 2. Impact on the colonies. The war's outcome opened vast new territories for settlement, but it also created tensions between the colonies and England. The Proclamation of 1763, which restricted westward expansion to avoid conflict with Native Americans, frustrated colonists eager to move into newly acquired lands. 1. Mercantilist policies. England's dominance was reinforced through mercantilist policies, such as the Navigation Acts, which regulated colonial trade to benefit the British economy. The colonies were required to export raw materials to England and import manufactured goods, creating a dependency on the mother country. 2. Royal control. By the late 17th century, many colonies had transitioned from proprietary or charter governance to royal colonies, directly controlled by the crown. This shift allowed England to exert greater political and economic influence over its American territories. The expansion of English dominance had devastating consequences for Native American tribes. 1. Loss of land. English settlers expanded into Native American territories, leading to displacement and conflict. The aftermath of the French and Indian War further accelerated this process as English settlers moved into formerly French-controlled lands. 2. Resistance and defeat. Native American resistance, such as Pontiac's Rebellion 1763 to 1766, attempted to push back against English expansion but ultimately failed due to superior English military power and weakened tribal alliances. By the mid-18th century, England had established itself as the dominant colonial power in North America. This dominance shaped the development of the colonies and their eventual path toward independence. 1. Cultural and economic influence. English laws, customs, language, and governance structures became the foundation of colonial society, creating a shared identity among the colonies. The colonies' integration into global trade networks under English control set the stage for economic growth and expansion. 2. Foreshadowing revolution. England's efforts to consolidate control over the colonies, particularly through taxation and trade regulations following the French and Indian War, sowed the seeds of discontent. The colonies' frustrations with English policies would eventually lead to the American Revolution. England's rise to dominance in North America was a result of strategic colonization, military victories, and economic policies. This dominance reshaped the continent, displacing rival European powers and Native American tribes while creating a network of thriving colonies. However, the very policies that solidified England's control also planted the seeds of rebellion, setting the stage for the next transformative chapter in American history, the fight for independence.